blowing smoke is really good. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm here to talk about poop. Lots of it, industrial size amounts of it, up to my elbows, over years and years and years. How many of you are autism parents? How many of you are not autism parents? How many of you are autism professionals? Okay, so the autism, how many of you are autism parents and professionals? Okay, so what I would love to see in 5 years is that show of hands as widespread across the room between the professionals and the parents. I am an autism parent and I have become by default a professional. And as many of you know, parents and professionals, autism parents and siblings really are professionals, they just don't get paid for it. One of the first things I realized when the diagnosis came for me was absolute certainty. This will either drain my family or it will nurture and feed my family. This is up to me. How? I don't yet know. But at least that question mark had to go out there. In the event, which is what I'm going to show you, it happened in ways I couldn't have even predicted. But I do think that the frontline, in the trenches campaigners, i.e. parents and siblings, should not be separated from the professional world. There are some ways in which autism can become divorced from its human context, and I think that that is something all of us know is not helpful. And as we go further into this adventure with autism, with the numbers going up and up all the time, and it clearly not going away, and this isn't a problem we're going to fix. It's not a problem at all, even. It would be interesting to see how the culture changes, and I think that's going to happen largely from within. For example, when I got the diagnosis, I don't know how many of you had a similar experience. I went into the neurologist's office, and it was sort of, well, Mr. Isaacson, I regret to inform you, basically, that your son's been diagnosed with autism. Oh, and by the way, there's not much we can do about it. We really don't know about it because this is a clinical diagnosis, not a medical diagnosis, so there is no protocol. You could try this and you could try that, but it's got question marks overall. Oh, and it will cost you about $100,000 a year, by the way, which you haven't got. And good luck to you. So effectively what happened is I walked through the door, the bloke was waiting with a bat, he hit me across the face, kicked me in the nuts, took $100 out of my pocket and shoved me out the door. That was emotionally what it felt like, despite the fact that he was operating from the best of intentions. Knowing now what I know about autism 10 years down the line, I feel very differently about it. And what if, I just want you to, what if when I had gone into that room, there'd been a bottle of champagne on ice, and the bloke had said, "Congratulations, Mr. Isaacson. Your son has this special kind of genius gene." I think we just witnessed it. The challenge and the adventure is going to be how we access this genius. But it is an adventure. And by the way, here are all these success stories. And, in fact, I have Dr. Temple Grandin standing behind this flag here. And he couldn't tell me any of that stuff. And we are right here, shoulder to shoulder, in lockstep with you, to see this adventure through. Are you game? Very cool. Let's drink. Imagine how that would have informed my next 2 years of floundering around in the sort of murky pit of between fear and despair and the general sort of negative approach. This type of psychology is very important to people. We're only on this planet for a certain number of years. We can't mess about. It's not good enough that it takes 24 months for people to get through their shock, their fear, their emotional upset, to start getting the job done. We need to start getting the job done quicker than that. So I think that as we all evolve more with this autism thing and lose our fear of it, quite the opposite, and realize this is actually very, very cool. My life is enormously improved because of autism. No question, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I now know so many adult autists and young adults who've gone on to be successful in various spheres. There's one key element that's needed, and it's what your Who's the lady who's doing the poop sessions for the parents? Yes. We all get together and poop together. My son actually loves history, and one of the things he loves about the Roman period is they had communal toilets, and they would sit there and have a chat while they had a poo. And we've even gone to Roman ruins and looked at them. If you go to the Colosseum in Rome, there they are. Yeah, with the holes in them. A little off topic, sorry. What she's doing is creating tribe. It goes beyond the word community. Get rid of that word, because community doesn't mean anything. Community is a word that people use when they want to actually not create a community. It's a bit of a lip service word. It doesn't mean anything at all. Oh, we're going to create community. What does that mean? It means getting together and talking about poop. It means tribe. It means extended familial support. I'm a Brit, as you can probably tell. But my family is actually African. We're white Africans. And my mum is South African, my dad is Zimbabwean. And I grew up with a lot of extended family. I grew up very much like a lot of Hispanic families do here, but not like a lot of Anglo families do. Since World War II, it's relatively recent, for Anglos in America, and in Europe to a large degree, the extended family system, usually in a semi-rural setting or an urban setting, has completely broken down and been replaced by an American dream of a suburban landscape where people live in large houses with large yards behind security, but effectively security fences, and do not interact with each other. That's all very well until a crisis hits. As soon as a crisis hits, whether it's a banal crisis, like you can't start your car, or a health crisis, you had better have some people around you. So I grew up with cousins on both sides, living next door and in the same house with me, and great gaggles of kids, and and I know all my fifth cousins and that sort of thing. It's very unusual for blondies like me, okay? But it didn't used to be. It's a relatively recent shift, and it's the big missing piece of the puzzle for people like us. So we have to go out there and create our mutual poop get-togethers and chat while we poop, because without it we will not survive, and we certainly won't thrive. But with it we will absolutely thrive. And Horseboy really is all about this. I'm going to go into the story of what it is, how it happened, why it happened, and then what are the methods we use in the two branches of the work that we do, etc. But if there's only one thing you take away from me burbling at you for the next little while, it's tribe, 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 and tribe. It's how humans have always lived. It's how 90% of people on planet Earth actually still do live today. And our current exploration of this suburban adventure is both recent and unsustainable, and it won't last. They're not even building the big subdivisions anymore. They're too expensive since the last crash. It's happening differently now. And it ought to, because the quality of life is impaired as soon as the crisis hits. And guess what? The crisis will hit at some point in our lives, some way, somehow. So, Horseboy, what is it? How many of you have no idea who I am at all? Oh, that's quite refreshing. That's all right, well, the rest of you know you can go to the pub and come back in 15, 20 minutes, have a couple of beers. All right, at the risk of boring those of you who do know who I am, I'll give you a quick précis. That's me, and that's my son, and we ride horses, clearly, hence Horseboy. I was always a horse guy. I grew up with horses. I've trained horses professionally most of my life for one job or another. When my son was diagnosed, I actually stopped riding. I thought he wasn't safe around horses. I didn't have any background in therapeutic riding or anything like that. And I was used to training, other people's problem sport horses, which de facto are not that safe around an emotionally incontinent speed demon, running around at hoof level. So I stopped riding, and that's a bad thing for me, because like many people who have kids on the spectrum, I myself have quite a lot of spectrum-y things. I'm pretty obsessive, and I like to think I put the fun back in dysfunction. And Nina's over there, who's nodding her. So for me to stop doing something that meant so much to me was to, in the face of this sort of despair that I talked about earlier, was to disappear down a bottle pretty quick. And venotherapy, fun as it is both expensive and sort of doesn't really get you anywhere. However, I'm a journalist by trade. I'm a trained observer. And I observed my child. And that was all I could do, because he couldn't talk to me. All I could do was see what he did kinetically, what he did with his body. You're right, I'm using my hands. Because he's not going to say, Dad, I want to go over there and do this. He's just going to go over there and start doing it. So I noticed very, very quickly, we live in the country, that he did better outside. If I would be in this room, he would do better out in that courtyard or there, and that's where we go, automatically. But Texas, rather like here in the summertime, is a hostile environment. You know, there's a reason why people like to sit in the air conditioning. That option was off the table. Out we were with the mosquitoes and the heat and the poison ivy and all of that. But I noticed he just flat out tantrum, bless. This is interesting. And he was engaging with the environment in ways that were giving me little clues about who he was. Why did he go for that kind of stick and not that kind of stick? Why did he go for this kind of tree and not that kind of tree? What birds and animals caught his interest and which did not? Why did he like to take this path and that? This path had dappled sunlight. This path had harsh glare sunlight. This sort of thing. You observe this stuff. Okay. One day, instead of going to the right, as he normally did on the path, he went to the left. And before I could grab him, he went through my neighbour's fence. And as Murphy's Law would have it that day, all 5 of his horses were grazing right by the fence. And of course, he runs straight in underneath them and chucks himself on his back under the hooves. So, obviously, I pooped my pants. And we should get together later. I'm creeping up to try to grab him, to pull him through the fence. And something rather wonderful happened. He didn't get trampled. In fact, the lead mare, the boss mare of that herd, Betsy, who's an absolute grumpy old cow, although there's no living being on the planet that I am more grateful to than this horse. That's her there on the left. Did something rather out of character. She pushed the other horses off, but gently with her nose. Normally horses are pretty rude about that stuff. And then she bent her head to him and began to lick and chew and half close the eye, which some of you, I'm sure, are horse people and know that this is an acceptance and submission gesture that horses make to each other. And there are many, a bit like a dog showing its belly, and there are many ways as a horse trainer you can get a horse to do this to you. That's the whole basis of horse training. But I hadn't seen a horse spontaneously offer this behavior to a Homo sapiens sapiens before, much less a babbling autistic 2.5-year-old one lying on his back. So I thought, well, this is amazing. Clearly, he's got the same horse gene that runs through our family. I come from a family of all my ancestors were like cavalrymen, basically. But how tragic. I'm still in the mindset of the neurologist giving me the diagnosis. I will never share this with him, really, because of his autism. Fortunately, like most parents, I turned out to be 100% and completely wrong. How many of you have often been 100% and completely wrong as parents? And how often has that saved your ass? Much as you may not want to admit it. So he just wanted to go back and back to her, and he would want to lay on her back. And she was an old, quiet horse, so that was okay. So I would put him up, and I would keep my hand on him here while she grazed. I could just whip him off if I needed to. And all of the stimming, great to have an autism audience, I don't have to explain what stimming is, we just stop. And I had a very different kid, very present. And then he was beginning to be echolalic at this point. It didn't occur to me to ride with him, because in England, where I've come from, the tack and the saddles that we use do not lend themselves to having a child in front of you. Big old Western saddles do. Journalist by trade, remember, I was sent on an assignment in Central America that month, and in a part where there were no roads, and there were all these dads riding around with their kids. I was like, that's what I should do. Quiet quarter horse, horse of the Americas, not an aggressive sport horse like I'm used to dealing with. She's not spooky, big old Western saddle. So I went and spoke to my neighbour Stafford, and he gave me the key to the saddle room. Now, that's huge. In our litigious society today, he could have said, sorry, bringing a 2.5-year-old autistic kid here around my horses, much as I love you, Rue, can't risk it. In fact, my neighbour on the other side, cut from the same cloth, old school southern gentleman in his 60s, a pastor no less actually, built a swimming pool right up against my fence in the woods, and I suggested to him that maybe I'd teach Rowan to swim in there in case he should climb over, and no, can't do it of the liability. Stafford, on the other hand, gave me the key to the saddle room. Interestingly, when I first moved into that house, about 3 days after I moved in, Stafford came riding Betsy down the draw and said, I've been riding this draw for some years, would you mind if I kept doing that, even though this is now your property? I said, of course, would you like a beer? He said, of course I would like a beer. He said, do you ride horses? I said, I do actually. He said, do you like to hunt? I said, I do. He said, would you like to go? I said, I absolutely would. And so we started a relationship there, even though you can tell I'm a complete tree hugger and card carrying. If you haven't hugged a tree, go hug one. Even if you are very, very conservative, etc., etc. Be a conservative that hugs a tree. I guarantee you it'll make you feel better. He, very true blue, Texas. However, shared interests, common interests, friendship, tribe. So even though I was living thousands of miles from my tribe, because my parents are in London, and Kristin, Rowan's mum, her mum in Seattle, her dad in Copenhagen in Denmark, no friends who could cope with Rowan, so no babysitting. Isolated there in the country, suddenly we had tribe. Everything began to change. So this is what made it possible. I get Rowan up in front of me in the saddle, and even though he's echolalic now by this point, there isn't really any expressive speech. So I've got him up there and I'm searching around for inspiration. And I always spoke to him as if he was verbal. I always felt that was very important. So we would be out on the trail, I'd say, oh, look, there's the sky, it's blue. What is the sky? What is the atmosphere? What is the pulmonary system? What is oxygen? What is photosynthesis in the trees? What is blue? What are the colours of the spectrum? And I would keep these monologues going. And I think a lot of us have found out, in fact, that a lot of seemingly checked out non-verbal kids, later on you find out that they were taking it all in, so one has to be rather careful what one says to them, or around them. I get stuff quoted to me from like 5 years ago, but it just astonishes me. I think with the actual day and time of day. So he's obviously going to enter the legal profession. So I'm up there and I'm just searching around for inspiration. My eye falls on the forest and the pond, so I'm like, okay, shall we ride to the woods or the pond? And classic echolalia, he repeats back the last 3 words as he goes to the pond. I'm like, well, that's just echolalia, but better than a kick in the face, right? So we ride down towards the pond, and this big blue heron gets up and flaps away. And he said, heron, and I didn't know he knew that word. And so I exclaimed an exclamation, and me, he's talking. I start giving him choices, he starts responding. This is unprecedented, you know, this is a couple of years in now. And I find out very quickly that the more I go at the canter, what Western people call the lope, the more communication I get. Very interesting. What's going on? Don't know, but it's working. All right. So, long story short, we start literally living in the saddle together. We make that our place, and we're up there 2 to 4 hours a day, out there. And suddenly my whole experience of autism begins to shift. It's not this thing, this trap, this hole I've fallen into. I'm now riding across the Texas countryside, exploring with my son. It's the most beautiful thing. And we're having these adventures on this amazing horse. And everything comes up there. He begins, all his language came. We started taking books up there. We'd read Dr. Seuss up there. We began our math up there. Everything. Then I have another string to my bow. You know I'm from Africa, my family. You know I'm a journalist. I fell into human rights advocacy fairly early in my career, particularly for hunting and gathering tribes in the Kalahari Desert, what we call Bushmen, who were being displaced to make way for diamond mines. The year that Rowan was diagnosed and made his connection with Betsy, 2004, I had to bring a delegation of Bushmen to the United Nations and the US State Department. Some of those guys were trained healers in their culture. And they met Rowan, and they said, oh, we could do some work on him. And I've been at numerous ceremonies like that through my life. I probably saw my first shamanic ceremony when I was 7 on my grandfather's farm in Zimbabwe. It just went on around you all the time. And I said, sure, because the worst thing that can happen is nothing. You know, it's song, it's prayer, it's dance. Knock yourselves out. To my gratification, for the 4 or 5 days that he was with them, the more extreme of his excessive behaviors really fell away. Meanwhile, we're trying every other therapy under the sun, and I won't bore you for 3 hours with everything we tried, but suffice to say, if you can think about it, we did it, and we did it, you know, pretty religiously. I'm not like this born-again shamanist or anything. I'm a very practical guy. I'll try everything. But nothing was working as radically as this horses and this exposure to these healers. So, okay, radical positive reaction to horse, radical positive reaction to healers, middling reactions to other things. Is there a place that combines these two things? Not here, because the horse doesn't come from here. Not Africa, that's not a horse culture. Where I thought, it's Mongolia. That's where the horse comes from. Equus caballus as we know it. Domesticated there, evolved there. Strong system of shamanism. In fact, the word shaman means he who knows, is a South Siberian word from that part of the world. Gut feeling, gotta go. Presented the idea to my wife, she said, it's a really terrible idea. I can't believe you would suggest something so stupid. Even just going to the supermarket is such a big deal, and we're going to keep this autistic, incontinent kid on it. No! And anyway, she hates horses. I'm the girl in the family, totally. And so I'm like, you know, from my point of view, because going to the supermarket is such a big deal, we almost might as well go to Mongolia. We're in the shit anyway, we might as well. If you're up the creek, you might as well look for a paddle. You know, so we argue about it, of course, and then we both back off. Each one, I think, hoping that the other one would forget. But the feeling just wouldn't go away, and eventually, I said to her, listen, I do realise this is my gig, and you don't have to do this. You are off the hook, but I think I have to. And I think she needed to be let off the hook. So for about 24 hours, she's like, fine, I'm not going, you go. And then she's like I'm not going to go. But she said, for me, it's totally win-win, because if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, I can say, I told you so forever. And if it goes well, it goes well. So we went to Mongolia, and let me show you this. Oh, I'm going to come back to that. Okay, here we go. And then I have to fish about until I get the little hand. There's the little hand, and then I go like that.
In April 2004, my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism. The feeling was like being hit across the face with a baseball bat. Our lives became clogged under a mountain of conflicting information on the disorder. We tried everything. He didn't speak to us. One day, he ran away from me and ran right up to a horse called Betsy. The moment I put Rowan on Betsy's back, he began to speak.
He's a nice horse.
As Rowan began to open up to me for the first time, a light bulb went on in my head. Was there a place on earth that combined healing with horses? Mongolia. This is a story about how, as a family, we did something crazy. How we ended up going halfway across the world in search of a miracle.
I think it wasn't exactly Ron's vision of Mongolia.
We're going to go up a several thousand-foot mountain and perform a 4-hour ritual with shamans. Isn't that what all families do? Sometimes I think he's like leaping forward, sometimes it's like he's totally regressing. I couldn't help wondering, did I really have his best interest at heart here?
I don't know how useful it is to think of us as normal and Rowan as the sick one.
And then something happened. Rowan began laughing, giggling. We were together again as a family. Forced me to listen to what interested him above all else. We're onto something good here.
So we went to Mongolia. Alright, we went out there with a kid that was autistic, and we came back with a kid that was autistic. However, his 3 key dysfunctions, his incontinence, his incessant tantruming due to the neurological stuff, and his inability to make friends, those 3 things he left behind him in Mongolia. And when we got back, we were obviously very nervous that he would regress again, but he didn't. I then became curious, was it just him who would have this sort of reaction, or other kids too? So I started running unofficial playdates in our neighborhood for other families with kids on the spectrum, and I stressed families. That would have the whole family come out for all sorts of practical reasons, including, I don't know your kid. You know, just because I'm an autism parent doesn't mean anything. If I've got you or the siblings there, particularly the siblings, as consultants, I can get much further, much quicker. But also, what about the siblings? What about mum? Maybe the siblings want to ride horses. Maybe they want to play soccer and do martial arts. Maybe there isn't the time and money and emotional energy available in the often single-parent family, because we know 80% of the marriages cave in. Oh, and they're broke, by the way, too. They can't afford all that stuff. Well, but we could do that there. Serve the whole family. And suddenly mum is connecting with other mums, exactly as you're describing, evaluating different therapies, or what have you tried, what worked for you, what worked for you, what's your experience? A place where there's no judgment, a place where there's trial. And this started to gel. And we noticed that the effect was pretty universal from what we were doing. Okay, interesting. Went and spoke, I have an ace in my sleeve, which is that Kristen, again, Rowan's mum, is a professor of psychology, developmental psychologist at the University of Texas. That's why we live in Austin. We had access to some scientists, and also by then I knew people like Temple Grandin and so on. I'd reached out and I'd gone and interviewed as many people as I could. And I kept asking them, what's going on? Why is it working like this? And they all looked at it and said, pretty much consensus across the board, what it looks like is oxytocin. The rocking of the hips in a very particular rhythmic way, we all know feels quite good. Get your minds out of the gutter. I'm talking about dancing and sitting in rocking chairs, man. But the reason why one feels this global sense of well-being when that happens, not just a localized sense of pleasure, is because of the production of oxytocin in the body. One of the things that we know about the autistic brain, there are some differences, it appears, the fMRIs that are being done right now frequently shows an over-enlarged amygdala, which is the part of your brain that governs your fight, flight, and freeze response. So it makes you produce a hormone called cortisol, the stress hormone, which in turn makes you produce adrenaline. It's there for survival. When the elephant comes charging through the door there, you want to run quickly. But you don't want to live your life constantly that way. So the anxiety, the frustration, the tantrums, the inability to deal with change, all of this sort of stuff seems to come down to cortisol. And there are things that trigger it. Equally, there are things that trigger a better response called oxytocin, which can largely cancel out that cortisol. And you can begin to retrain the body chemistry and the brain. It's rather interesting, particularly if you do it an awful lot. And it doesn't have to be with horses, by the way. We're going to get to that in a little bit. So we thought, well, that's great, because we can give an industrial-sized shot to the spine simply by moving the horse in these rhythms. And that was why, when we were moving at the canter and the low, we were getting more of it. Okay? Exaltation, euphoria from the kids, and then frequently words coming out. Absolutely amazing. Sometimes it would take quite a while, sometimes it would happen fairly quickly. But even if the kid never got on the horse, it really didn't matter, because we had this whole sort of tribe thing going on. And there were all sorts of other benefits. And we had play equipment, and we had all these other animals, and so on and so on. And we started automatically looking at how we could reproduce some of these actions on the horse, on the play equipment. That was common sense. So, okay, he's afraid of the horse, but let's figure out how to do that. We could do that in a car. We could do that on a train. We could do that in a swimming pool. I could do that on my shoulders. I could do that in a rocking chair. So we opened a little centre called the New Trails Centre, and very quickly we got overwhelmed. As you know, massive spike in the autism numbers, and we don't charge any families any money to come through the door. That was, if you're from out of town, you do. But if you're central Texas, within a 100-mile radius of us, it's free. Reason is, I was that broke parent. I do not want to be asking a single mum for whom the $5 in gas to get out to us is a consideration for $100, because A, that $100 would not even keep the lights on, and B, she can't afford it. And C, I also don't want her to be dependent on us. I want to teach her how to do exactly what we do in her own living room, so that if she comes out to us, it's a choice. It's not a feeling of urgency, oh my God, the world will end if I can't get out to Horseboy. I come from a parent's perspective, you see. So we got overwhelmed almost immediately. And we realized that even if we served 500 kids a week, we wouldn't even scratch the surface of the local need. And you shouldn't serve 500 kids a week, because that institutionalizes what cannot and should not be institutionalized. What one wants to do is serve a handful of kids very, very well. So then we realized we needed lots of little places doing what we do. So we started training people in something called Horseboy Method, which we're going to talk about now. And within a couple of years, we trained about 1,000 people on how to do it. Parents, practitioners, equine professionals, and others. And then we started getting people saying, well, it's all very well for you guys. You live in the countryside in Texas. But how is this relevant to my life in Brooklyn or London or middle of Phoenix or wherever? I'm like, you know what? Fair comment. So we really thought, well, there's all these ways to sort of reproduce the oxytocin. And all these ways to approach learning through movement and kinetics. We don't need the horse necessarily. The horse is like our pure method that's taught us how to get there, but now we can reproduce it. So we came up with a second branch of stuff called Horseboy Learning, which we're going to talk about later this afternoon in more detail, which I could teach any of you in 2 hours, and you could go home and teach anyone else in 2 hours. A lot of it's stuff you already know. It's just how to contextualize it in a particular way. This is effective, and it's cheap, and it's sustainable, and it can go. And it doesn't replace anything. It doesn't replace your ABA or speech therapy or your OT or anything. Keep doing all that. Add this. That way, if you do run out of money, and you do run out of time, or something happens, it's not the end of the world. And that way, too, you can be more discerning about whose services you employ. They've got to be at least as good as you, if not better. And that's as it should be. What professionals, me, anyone else, should be challenged to be at the top of our game. So, as parents need to be more and more empowered, because by the way, it's damned expensive, we know this, and we parents are in this beyond the grave. You know, we have to set up financial supports and stuff. You know, what happens when we die? I did die. In 2012, I had an accident on a horse. My fault, nothing to do with Horseboy. I was having a laugh, jumping cross-country fences, which is a dangerous thing to do. And I judged one wrong, and I flipped the horse over, and he landed on top of me, ended up in the hospital. That's not what killed me. What killed me was after they put my leg back together, they overdosed me on morphine. And I died. I was down the tunnel talking to God. Having a lovely time, by the way. I can thoroughly recommend death. Everyone should do it. Everyone will do it. And it's nice to know there's not only are there no nasty surprises, but it's very lovely what's waiting. However, it was a wake-up call. This can happen to any of us at any time. So we cannot have a culture of dependency. We need to create support tribe that can keep the work going regardless of whether we are physically present or not. That's what tribes do. All right, so let's look at this horseboy thing. So we realize very quickly that autism is just really a proving ground, and I'm sure a lot of you know this. With autism, the stakes are so high, the kids are so unforgiving, that they'll never lie just to please you, to let you think that it works. It either works or it doesn't, very like horses. So because of that, it's a proving ground for any other neuropsychiatric condition. Frequently we find that the siblings often have ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety disorder, something else going on. The parents too, perhaps me, certainly. If it works for autism, it's going to work across the board. Kinetics and movement. This is the most important thing. These kids have to move. Do not make them sit down. If you make them sit down, please go do another job, because it's missing the point of who these children are. They need the movement in order to learn. Without the movement, they will not learn, or they'll learn so poquito that is pointless. And you've got to create the right environment for this to happen in. You've got to create an environment in which the kid really wants to be. You've got to deal with intrinsic motivation, not rewarding for do this boring thing and then I'll let you do this thing you want to do. Here's this thing you want to do. We're back in the forest with me in the early days, observing what he was doing anyway. I will enter your game here, picking up leaves and doing this. And I will try to roll some things in while you're doing that and observe your pattern of doing that. I'm not going to separate you from the activity that you want to do. That is not commonsensical. You do that with horses, you end up dead. That's for sure. You do that with kids, you end up blocked out. So to come into their world, it's important. If you think about what autism means, what does it actually mean, the word autism? We use it every day, don't we? But what does it mean? It's a Greek word, auto. What does auto mean? The self. Automobile, self-propelled machine. Automatic, moves by itself. Autism, self-ism, locked within the self. The difficulty is the relationship with the exterior world. That's where we have to be. Lovely thing about the horse, it carries us into the exterior world, filling us with oxytocin effortlessly and delightfully, but there are other ways to do it too. Okay, so we started with horses, but we've managed to take it further. And you can use this stuff, once you know the principles of kinetic learning, in any context at all. Homeschool, a regular classroom, car ride, anything. All right. Which one? This one. Okay. You know the history. You know what we did. Haha, quick beyond it. So now, what is horseboy method? It comes down to a fairly simple 6-stage process. The first and most important thing is the environment. I'm not digging these fluorescents, are you? Not really. Wouldn't it be nicer if we were able to sit in that shaded courtyard? It's not quite sangria time yet, but we're having our Starbucks out there and so on. Why do we want to be out there and not there? Because that's more the environment that we are actually genetically programmed to be in. We are hunting and gathering apes. We are not products of technology. Technology is a product of us. Where do we go when we go on vacation? Where do you want to be on vacation? The beach. Why? Anybody know?
Soothing.
Because Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us, evolved on the coastal margins of southern Africa, in the ecotone, the meeting of ecosystems, where the most food is, which is land and sea. So the highest quality of life for us is there. So we intrinsically feel safer, better, calmer, at ease, secure. It's like we go to the beach and we feel like we've got $1 billion in our bank account, because from a hunter-gatherer's perspective, we do. We can survive, it's easy. And we like it to be warm because we're subtropical apes. So we want to be in environments that are sensorily pleasing for us without bad sensory triggers. For us, we can kind of put up with it. You can put up with listening to the long-haired bloke go blah, 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 while you're desperate for a pee, because you've learned those social skills, but you'd rather not have to. You'd rather be sitting on the beach. This is the most important thing, but it's also the human environment, it's the tribe, it's the support, it's the small animals, it's the trampoline, it's being able to take the shoes off and run about. It's all of these things. These are really important. Ignore them at your peril, because it really doesn't matter how good you are in terms of technique. If you don't set your environment up, you're only going to get a certain percentage of the way there. And think of it like gardening. If you prepare the soil, the plants will really grow. If you don't, it's 50-50. 50-50 for us is not good enough. The environment, luckily, is also the simplest thing to get right. Try and be outside, try and be in shade, try and have water nearby, try and have small animals, try to let the kids run about barefoot, try to have a trampoline, try to have other types of play equipment, and a goat, and 2 tame porcupines like we do, and tame deer, and all the other weird stuff that's going. But at the very least, just be outside, in a nice environment, without too many thorny, sticky things. So clear those away, have nice brushed sand and gravel. It's a perfect environment here on the desert. Okay. And then you work on the sensory issues directly. So the best way to understand that for us is, I don't know if any of you have ever drunk too much beer in your life, but assuming that that's a possibility, and that you may have then had to go to work or do something the next day, you weren't at the top of your game. And the reason you weren't at the top of the game was because you were sensorily impaired. The nausea, the befuddlement, the lack of sleep, all of these things made it very difficult. Similarly, if I were to start putting my nails down a chalkboard right now, or blasting industrial heavy metal at you, or that sort of thing, you find it very, very difficult to engage your intellect. You'd be so, or we're in the glare of the hot sun, or in a high wind, or anything like that, or by a freeway. You wouldn't really be able to engage your mind too well. Not as well as you could in a better learning environment. So we want to think about what is the sensory input in our environment. Is it going to distract and trigger tantrums and discomfort? If it triggers discomfort, what are our chances of learning? Versus if we really think about sensory comfort, what are our chances of learning? They're going to be higher. So it's practical, it makes sense. And there's a certain point at which the intellect then can really engage. And one of the things that we know in autism is that there's almost never a problem with the intellect itself. The intellect is usually intact, if not working at a really high level. What we find is a difference in cognition. And you wouldn't even worry about the difference between intellect and cognition if you weren't involved in autism. I certainly wasn't until I got involved and had to be. Cognition, what I mean is how information reaches the brain and how the information is processed. That is different. And because of that, it's so affected by the sensory stuff, which is so affected by the environment, that we want to set those things up first. Okay. Then we ride with the kids. The oxytocin out into the exterior world, deep pressure, voice in the child's ear, not a challenging frontal gaze that they have to defend themselves from. All these wonderful things come together. And from there, we build it. We build perspective-taking and rule-based games on the horse, because the horse can play it for the kid, and the kid can get it by osmosis. And then we can start with academics. Oh, yes, we can. We can teach anything up there. Physics in French. How? And finally, when the kid is too big to share the saddle with us, we drive them in long lines in front of us to keep those nice rhythms going, and we keep the conversations going in a way that gets them teaching us about what interests them. Their obsessions, that's where you want to go. Because one person's obsession is another person's livelihood. I make my living through my obsessions. I hope a lot of you guys do too, because that's fulfilling. We want to make it plain to these people that this is possible to do. So here's our environment at New Trails. Trampoline, goats, the front porch, the family. So here's the sister of this little boy here. She wants to ride. She gets riding lessons for free. Here's the brother. He doesn't care for horses, but he loves soccer and martial arts. Well, this guy's a 7 millionth Dan Taekwondo dude, and he comes in and he goes through the patterns with this kid. How cool. Suddenly, their relationship with autism changes. Instead of it being something that shuts down opportunities for them and shuts down their dreams, it opens the door to their dreams. Changes their relationship to the autism, changes their relationship to their sibling, changes the dynamic before we've even done anything. And the small animals are really important, because the horse is quite big and intimidating. It's not that it's something that needs to come in gradually. But these small social animals are not intimidating at all. And then the horse comes in very casually, with no pressure. There's Betsy, she's just there. When the child is ready and curious and reaches out, that's when we begin. I don't care if that takes 3 hours or 3 months. And I can say to parents, and guess what? It doesn't cost you anything. So the worst thing that can happen is nothing. So at the very least, this is going on. But you know what? You probably will get up there. Okay. Then we work on the sensory work. You remember, you saw Rowan in the trailer, lying body to body on Betsy like that, and how communicative and still he was. We see this repeated time and time again. Often, this lady here, for example, there's some interesting offshoots from that. She says it's the only place that he allows her cuddles up there together. They you put siblings and friends up together, and then there's this certain point where the light seems to go on, if you're patient. It's very interesting, and once that happens, you're in, you're away. But the trick is, go slow. Long-term approach. I'm not looking for a quick fix. I'm in it for life and beyond. Most things in life take a minimum of 2 to 5 years to really play out with any degree of positive outcome. Writing a book, training a horse, learning a skill, learning a language, learning guitar, whatever it is. Why should it happen quickly with this? No. No. And if we don't want it to, then we stop putting ourselves under pressure to fix, 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 which means we stop putting the pressure on the kid. And by the way, there is no problem to fix. There's non-verbal dudes out there in diapers publishing poetry. Tito Thingamajig, his second name's got 80,000 syllables, I can never remember it. Whose mum is Soma, the autism guru lady from Austin, Texas, who's got this amazing teaching technique. We will be seeing people writing computer software who are non-verbal in diapers within the next 10 or 15 years. The livelihood part of it will happen. We've tried, but it will happen. We can take a long-term positive approach here. Okay, then the back riding itself. We're sitting behind the child, we're working as much as possible at the lope and the canter, which requires great equestrian skill. You cannot do this unless you've got about 20 years of solid riding background behind you. So, because of that limitation, that's another reason why we need to take this away from horses. But if you are going to do it with the horses, this movement here, the canter in place, it's called the terre à terre, or the metzer, the big one like that. That's the old cavalry name for that movement. It's on the spot like this. And you do it in combat, so that the horse stays moving while you trade blows. And you can also fire the horse this way and that way as a weapon if you need him to. They also use it in bullfighting. You get an extraordinary reaction from the kid in this. It's brilliant fun. Suddenly, we're having this extraordinary adventure, but we're really getting results. Voice in the ear, deep pressure, out into the exterior world, full of oxytocin. Brain switches on its learning receptors, because anything that makes you find your balance from moment to moment, like getting up on this chair, to the edge of the chair, I might fall, so I'm suddenly on high alert. But usually that's a cortisol experience, usually that's a stress thing. We take that out and replace it with oxytocin. Bob's your uncle. We've got a kid who's engaged. It's amazing. Then the perspective-taking rule-based games, it gets really interesting. We teach the horses circus tricks, and all our animals know tricks, so that whatever, if you want to pick our chicken up and put him on the shoulder and pretend that he's a pirate macaw, it will do it. The reason being that you never know quite what the kid's going to get into, but cause and effect is very important. You do this with the stick, or this with the voice, and the horse gets up on his hind legs, or plays saxophone, or does the laundry, or bows. It's amazing. You're motivated to try again. What's the first milestone in developmental psychology for children for building theory of mind in terms of games, playground games? It's a particular game. It's the first game we all play. We play it automatically if we're neurotypical. What is it? Peekaboo is actually, it's true, is the first one as a very small infant. Now let's assume we're at kindergarten or a little bit higher than that. Yes! The first rule-based game. Typically kids on the spectrum, it's very important to play tag. You are you, I am me, Super important for building the brain. Guess what? The horse plays it for you. And you play it with the family. And the child is not required to understand. So, we're going to play tag now. And you are not it, and I'm not it, but we both could be it. And if you were to be it, then, you get up on the horse, and I just ride up to Mum and go, you're it, and I run away on the horse. And as I'm running away, I go, she's it, we better run away. So I give the running commentary. I don't require any feedback. How do I know when the kid has understood it? He takes control of the game, yeah. At a certain point, about 12 to 22 weeks in, it's very interesting. The kid will suddenly say, she should tag her, she should tag her. And that's when you know they've got it. From there, you move to the next one, which is hide and seek. And hide and seek, you start to introduce academic concepts. So for example, Ileana, who runs the program, who's there, is from Germany. And let's say she rides off. And we say, well, we can't see Ileana, we need to go find Ileana now. But you know what? Maybe she went back to where she lives, which is Germany, which is not even here. We live in the United States of America, in a continent called North America. Germany's actually in Europe, it's across a whole ocean. So we'll swim across the ocean now, you know. And over here in Germany, you know, they don't speak English there. They speak a different language. They speak German. Let's see if we can call out for her. Where are you in German? It's wo bist du? Okay, wo bist du? But she doesn't answer. Okay, what other sense have we got? Sense of smell. What do they eat in Germany? They eat a lot of sausage and sauerkraut, which gives them gas. So if she were to pass some gas, would it have a sort of a timbre and a bouquet of wurst and sauerkraut? Yeah, at that point, on cue, behind the tree, she goes, and, oh yeah, totally sauerkraut, you know. Funny toilet humour, always use toilet humour. I go into why you should use toilet humour. There's some very good reasons why you should use toilet humour. But we've just introduced geography, language, history, cuisine, culture, effortlessly. Then the academics begin. When we were first working this stuff out, you could count the footfalls of the horse. I had rown up there in my training sessions on horses, the quiet ones, where you actually count the footfalls and count the rhythm out for the horse aloud. That's how he learned to count, that's how he got his first map. And then of course you start doing it on your shoulders, etc. But it got more than that. Fractions, for example, or basic math. Let's do some basic math. Have any of you heard of maths? Who's heard of maths? Or matha, as you call it. Matha. Who's heard of matha? Anyone heard of matha? Math? Anyone heard of math? Yes? Is it boring? Yes. Who thinks it's boring? Who doesn't think it's boring? Alright, let's take the people who don't think it's boring. 4 people who don't think it's boring. Okay, 1 and 3 more. Do you think it's boring? Okay, you come up. 2 more who don't think it's boring, please. Okay, do you think it's boring? Okay, I'm just press ganging you anyway. Alright, so I'm on the horse, and I've got young Zibongile in front of me, and Zibongile has just moved here. She's Xhosa, and she's from South Africa. She's got autism. So I say to Zibongile, I need 1 more, please.
We're not good at that.
Nor me, that makes 2 of us. I'd say, look, there's 4 people. There's dad, you know, mum, sister, perhaps. There's an odd one out there, isn't there? There's a bloke. The other ones are non-blokes. So what if we were to take the bloke away? We've got 1 bloke, we've got 3 non-blokes. So we come in with a horse and we literally move him out the shoulder. Maybe in an evil Godzilla voice, move him out, with farts on him, move him out. Okay. Always appeal to the child's sense of anarchy and rebellion. In a straight-laced society such as our own, taking a poop and doing a fart is the ultimate act of rebellion. You must appeal to this. It will get their attention. Remember, autism, locked within themselves, not motivated to connect, they're not going to show off, they don't want your attention. You've got to make yourself worth the attention. You better be funny. Alright. So we've got 3. So I think they call that subtraction. You take 1 away from 4, you get 3. Now what if he's a bit lonely over there, put someone, okay. And the girls sort of miss his sense. We're going to move him over there in an evil granny voice with tickles. And we add 1 to 3 and we get 4. Then I might put the horse into a canter and say, do you think they can run? Do you think they know what's going to happen? And I'll ride around behind them. What's this division thing? What is this division thing? And I'll literally charge, and they have to, way, like that, and they scatter. We divided 4 by 2, we get 2 groups of 2. Then what about this multiplication? It's round them up. So we'll round them up, 2 times 2. Maybe give them a little smack on the bum as we go, to sharpen them up. And we've got our basic arithmetic. Okay, And I'm asking nothing back from the kid. I'm not saying, so what's 2 plus 2? That will be confirmed later. Drop it in by stealth. Use humour and use stealth. Okay. Make the kid think it's all just fun. Now what about this fractions malarkey? Anyone heard of that? Yeah? Alright, so I can see toes, I can see eyes, I can see smiles, I can see other things too. What would happen if I was to go from here, the toes, smiles, eyes and other things, back to the toes, smiles, eyes and other things? I don't know, let's do it. What do you want to do that? The walk, trot or canter? Canter, of course you do. You want to do a canter in an evil Godzilla voice with farts on your head, or a canter in an evil granny voice with tickles? Evil granny voice with canter. So we're doing the lope, the cantings, we're getting all the oxytocin. Need a well-trained horse for this. And we get all the way around. And we're back where we started. That's all the way around. What happens if we go halfway around? Once we get halfway around, excuse me, I'll take a shortcut. Oh, I'm in a danger zone, total danger zone. Not these ones, because these are non-bloke ones. And so we know that the only thing that comes out of those is choirs of angels and rose petals. But this one here, I know, from my own personal experience, no judgments, can produce gases that will kill all organic life within a 20-mile radius of the epicenter and simply leave the building standing. I mean, we've been working on this for some decades of our lives. So I need to move away from this halfway point pretty quickly. So 2 halves gets me back to where I started, makes a whole. Now what's half of a half? What about that? So we ride to here. And there we've got, you know, safe zone, danger zone a little bit there. They call that a quarter, I believe. What happens if we add another quarter? Another half-half. Gets us back to the danger zone. 2 quarters make a half. Interesting. Okay, 3 quarters, getting a little safer, but not too safe, so we better not stay too long. 3 quarters, and then 1 last quarter. 4 quarters make a whole. You might think this is asinine. I'm telling you, if you do this stuff, within about 2 weeks, it graduates to paper. It's amazing. 2 autistic boys helping each other here. And Clue, of course, is a good mathematician, so he's coming in as a consultant here. But what were the components of this? Fun, play, movement, and doing it with your body. It's not an abstract concept of half. It's not an abstract concept of addition. We put them together, we take them apart, we make it funny, we move ourselves halfway, quarter way, etc., etc. Then it's understood on a visceral cellular level. Then, and only then, should you move it to paper. But what's amazing is when you do move it to paper, it happens fairly spontaneously. And the effects become quite accelerated. So with Rowan, for example, within 4 weeks he was adding and subtracting fractions. And within 16 weeks he was doing it in double columns with figures. As we know, it's the cognition that's different, not the intellect is the problem. How the information is taken in needs to be taken in kinetically first. Movement, 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 movement. Get off the chair. Go outside and do it as play. You'll have more fun yourself. A big hand for the various kids. Okay, so, and then from there, self-advocacy. Getting them to teach you about what interests them. Cisco, autistic, helping another autistic girl at our place make chainmail. He's taken his stims and turned them into the making of chainmail to keep his hands busy. He's obsessed with the Middle Ages. He's now doing it professionally at the Ren fairs. We have a jousting program in what we do. We have all sorts of fun stuff. And they hire him now as an armourer. And he's also now really come out of his shell and started to get a job in tech as well. And so. But he was not always doing so well, I can tell you. My son, Scud, Rowan, that act there with the microphone, telling us about endangered animals. He is an animal freak, it's his obsession. Well, guess what? He's come up with the idea for a TV reality show called Endangerous, about going to see animals that are both endangered and dangerous, based around toilet humour. And I think it's going to get picked up. It's his intellectual property. He will be the one drawing the royalty from that. Scott, making water sculptures. To the outside eye, it just looked like random stimming and splashing. Never underestimate stims. Never try and stop the kid from stimming. Give them something to stim with and about. Observe the stim. Can it be a skill set? If I'm rocking, can I dance? If I'm chanting, can I sing? If I'm banging, can I make stuff? Usually the answer is yes. Is it a stim that's trying to push the world out because of stress, just for coping? Or is it a stim of pleasure? You get positive and negative stims. Often the same physical action with a different emotional bias behind it. One needs to observe. One needs to make friends with it. One needs horse training, absolutely. You see what the horse does. If a horse lifts and wants to kick me, I know that horse is going to be very easy to train in piaffe, the trot on the spot. If the horse wants on his hind legs, I know the horse is going to be very easy to train in the canter work. So I will use the horse's evasions to my advantage. Take a practical view. Okay, but most of us aren't even in contact with horses, so it's all academic, right? Unless we take it away from horses. And this is what we'll talk about in a bit more detail later, but suffice to say here that we have another 6-stage process for horse boy learning, which can be done anywhere, homeschool, classrooms, etc. The environment and the sensory are always the most important things, and particularly in this context, because we are so used to the idea of being in difficult sensory environments that we almost don't notice it anymore. We just hit the bottle a little hard and shout at our spouses. But we are reacting to the stress. But believe me, if you can go do it out there, you're going to or tweak the environment, which we'll talk about how to do later. Movement, 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 move. You want to anyway. Who the hell wants to sit on a chair all day, for Christ's sake? And then perspective taking, theory of mind, social skills and rule-based games. Really important. You need the family there for that, if possible. Builds the brain. Builds theory of mind. We know the brain is very plastic. We know you can come back from strokes, from severe brain trauma, that sort of thing. Hell, there's a kid in Austin who's only got 4 millimeters of brain. And was born pronounced dead. They were going to unplug him. The mum said, no. That kid is communicating through a keyboard. He's got 4 millimeters of brain. The brain is an interesting thing. It's almost like the difference between RAM and hard drive. It's like you can almost create the RAM that you need by following a very logical progression. Okay? And then again from there, the academics and the self-advocacy just flow. I didn't need a horse to do what I just did. I could have done it with a kid on my shoulders. I do it with kids in wheelbarrows. I do it in the pool. I do it on a trampoline. So many places you can do it. But much more important are the ethics that you follow. The first one is self-compassion. You're going to make mistakes. Even now you might be thinking, oh, I've been doing it in this environment that is maybe wrong, and then you immediately start beating yourself up. Don't. This came to us by trial and error. I made a lot of mistakes. Now I know that the only thing that's going to work is to follow the child and use intrinsic motivation. If the kid wants on the trampoline, you teach on the trampoline, period. Or you cut one leg off the horse before you start training it, basically. But we're only human, and we were not brought up to do this. We were all brought up in much more controlled situations, with parents feeling that if they didn't try and control our every movement, we'd run under buses, all the time. Those of us who were lucky enough to grow up on farms and in more rural settings had more freedom of movement. We know how important this is, right? But if you haven't been doing that, don't beat yourself up. I mean, yeah, there's pedophiles out there, and it's dangerous, and we're operating from the best of intentions. So self-compassion is important. When you feel you've made a mistake, give yourself a little hug and talk to yourself as you would talk to a good friend. That was, you did your best there, and it wasn't really that bad, and you'll get it next time. We think that relentless self-criticism is the only way we can motivate ourselves to success. It's not true. A lot of studies are now showing that people with the most talent for self-compassion are the ones who can look at the stuff that they do that they don't want to keep doing, feel it, forgive themselves, move on and do something about it. It's not the same as self-indulgence. They're not staying in it, but they're forgiving themselves for being human beings like the rest of us. Now, if you go around hugging yourself all the time, people think you're completely nuts. So, what I do is I tend to do this. If I'm having a moment where I'm really suffering because I think I've made I've really arsed it up, you know. I've now started to do this, and it looks like you're sort of folding your arms, but not like this. There you see, I just ballsed it up, didn't I? Just a bit like that. And that way I can give myself and just by doing that, I can actually start creating some oxytocin. You know what else works to make your body produce oxytocin? You rock, okay, and put a cheesy false grin on your face. It does actually work. I challenge you to do it now. Let's do it for 5 seconds. Everybody, squad well, smile, bottom of the head, quick, smile. Feel better? It's weird, it's an old horseman's trick. When you get on a horse that you're afraid of, you do this. And your body relaxes and tells the horse it's okay. Good boy. And then we go quietly to work. It's a very good trick there. Also works, by the way, in African border situations when the 15-year-old guys in Angola are pointing their AK-47s at you. Good morning. Ah, beautiful day, isn't it? That's a fine-looking AK-47, yeah. No pressure on themselves or you. Don't be results-oriented. The results will come. Take a long-term view. Think this is going to take 2 to 5 years, so that's fine. We don't expect a neurotypical education to take a weekend. Why do we think it's going to be any less long with someone on the spectrum? Relax. And particularly the language. Whenever you get tempted to say, so, what's half of a half, or what's... model it, always give the answer. What will happen is, you can say what's half a half if you immediately give the answer. But what starts to happen is they start beating you to it. And when they start beating you to it, they've confirmed it, but you don't press the freeze button of the amygdala. Putting kids on the spot with relentless eye contact. I'm a therapist, I'm going to look at you like this an awful lot. You know, I mean, any of us, you know, if we do that, let me sustain some eye contact, just a little bit longer than is strictly comfortable. It's really not nice. Then if I come into your space a little bit, it's even less nice. If I come to here, you want to do 2 things. You want to go boom and run away. It's fight, flight. But the freeze response is frequently, even if they know the answer, they often can't give it to you. That's why standardized testing doesn't work for these kids, nor should it. We've come up with some quite fun ways of making sure that the knowledge is confirmed. We call it stealth testing. We'll talk about that this afternoon. Humor. It's got to be funny, or let's just all go home, you know. I mean, and remember, toilet humor in particular, if you think that toilet humor is beneath you, don't do anything with kids. Because kids are wiser than adults. Those of us who think toilet humor is not funny have been conditioned to think that way. Because it's funny. And we've been conditioned to think that way to stop us from committing acts of subversion and rebellion as children. And it works for some of us. And it's not funny, I don't think that's funny at all. But the kid in front of you knows it's funny. He will tell you the truth. Use it, whether you think it's funny or not, because it works. Because it appeals to that sense of anarchy and rebellion. And remember, most of these kids are therapied out. By the time they walk through my door, you know, they've been to ABA, speech therapy, OT, and they should. But I don't want them thinking, oh God, when they come through my door, another thing with pressure where I feel I might succeed or fail, and I don't want to disappoint mummy, and all that's going on in their minds. Humor, 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 humor. You're just having a laugh while we roll all that learning in by stealth. We can go the extra mile. Humor, humor. The 15-minute rule, very important. I've broken it today badly by talking for so long. We know that most people can only concentrate for 5 to 15 minutes. Horse training, if you push it beyond that, you get an explosion. Never push it beyond that if you know what you're doing with horses. You can do lots of them through the course of the day. But better, lots of little 5-minute bursts, and then you back right off. Little bursts, and then you back right off. That's much more effective for all of us, not just kids on the spectrum. Attention is another interesting one. This is something I've really learned. When the kid is turning his back like that and bouncing on the trampoline, he's taking in everything you're doing and saying. And he's doing what he needs to find a little bit of space. And you have to take a risk with this. I'll give you an example. I started reading last year, my son, The Hobbit, which is the most complex book we've tried to date. And he found it a bit tough going, so he would get up and walk around the room and so fine. Then he started getting up, walking around the room and picking up his favourite reading, which is the thesaurus. He loves the meaning of words. And he started reading the thesaurus while I was reading him The Hobbit. And he would interrupt me and say, velocity means, to go forward really fast or something like that, Okay, and then said, smile, blah, 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 blah. Then he would get up and leave the room. And I'm like, is he taking it in? So I started asking Jenny, who's his main teacher with us, to start rolling into the conversation little bits about The Hobbit, so if we could see if we could gauge if he knew where he was in the plot. He totally did. Then he started going out and shutting the door and getting on his computer and playing computer games. However, he stayed current with the plot. And when we ended up going to see the movie, he was pointing out what was wrong, what was right, what they'd added, what they'd taken out, and how generally boring it was compared to the book. So attention is something you have to learn to think about differently, because the cognition, again, is different, and the need to move. If that had been my mother when I was a kid, she'd have taken it very personally and gotten very upset with me for getting up and leaving the room, but maybe it would have been easier for me, because my mum could be pretty damn intense, Parents are intense. And, I want you to listen to The Hobbit, and then said Thorin Oakenshield as he, for the 87th time, as he sharpened his axe. So take a little risk with that, but find ways of gauging what's going on, and be creative. Don't be afraid to try stuff. Worst thing that can happen is nothing. So you can't do any damage. So roll stuff out. Okay, we know this kid loves to pile up, do this with sand through his. Let's experiment with different colours of sand, types of sand. Let's learn about sand. Let's learn about sedimentary rock. Let's learn about the sea bottom. Let's think everything we can do with sand. SpongeBob SquarePants. Everything we can think of that's to do with sand. Let's create a sand pit in his bedroom. Do what he needs. And this is key. You always drop the thing into the conversation casually. Blah, 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 angle, protractor. Blah, 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 geometry. Kids are like, oh, we've heard that before. You don't explain. A little bit later in the pool, there you are swimming. Oh, you see that end of the pool up there? That's a right angle. You know what? I'm just going to check it out. I just want to be sure. I'll be right back in a sec. He sees me swim. Yeah, it was. Next time he's there, a little closer, I'd pull a protractor out of my swim trunks and go, oh yeah, it's called a protractor, it helps you find out. I just want to check it. Oh yeah, it is. And then gradually, we make games out of it, like, oh, you see that rather lovely person over there? I think that rather lovely person is at 35 degrees. Should we swim over at 35 degrees and find it? They do it with their bodies, and then to confirm it, an example of that would be we might do a treasure hunt 3 months later, and the treasure hunt in the woods might say there'll be a clue that the kid finds that says, on the oak tree, 45 degrees to your left, and there's a protractor lying there. He loves the Lion King, is a Zazu. It's yours, if you can get there. He finds it. Gets the Zazu. You just tested him in a non-standardized way. Drop it, do it, confirm it. Take your time. We're starting to get schools groups asking us to do this now. I pulled my son out of school can't even remember what year it was, but it was some years ago. And last summer, the superintendent of our local school district showed up on our doorstep and said, why did you take your son out of the school? And I said, well, because it was shite. But if you have an hour, I'll give you a cup of tea and tell you the story. So we did, and at the end of it, I said, well, why are you here? And she said, well, I want you guys to come and train our staff. Failing school district, 2 schools facing closure. Clearly their stuff not working. Dallas School District now approaching us. McIntyre Group of private schools in the UK approaching us. Edging from the margins to the mainstream, because what we do is practical. We don't make promises, but it's practical. Something in here is going to be useful. After the childhood bit, we have something at home we call the School for Gentlemen, when it's the late adolescence, early adulthood thing. The courtly dance of socio-sexual politics. Why do girls say no when they might give you other conflicting signals sometimes? What do women want? We can tell people what women want. We have found it out. And it's actually very simple and very, very good, and they need to know this. It needs to be spelled out for them. They behave this way, giving these conflicting signals, because in the species of natural selection, they need to know that whoever they select for a mate for DNA really is going to match certain criteria, which can be a little bit conflicting. He has to be enough of a bad boy to be clever, but not so much of a bad boy that he might abandon the family. And he's got to be enough of a good guy to stay with the family and be loyal and supportive, but not so much of a good guy that he's too boring to be with, or isn't clever enough to think his way around problems. The only way this 17-year-old girl is going to figure her way there is by experimenting with this conflicting set of ethics. And that's why she has to, for the good of our species, or we all wouldn't be here, behave this way. Do you understand? So don't take it personally. And date 35-year-olds. The same thing with the work situation. The bloke is called the boss because he's the boss. So yes, he's going to tell you to do things. You need to be okay with this before you go in, because without it, he cannot or she cannot make those decisions that result in you getting paid. This is why the workplace rules are like this. And here are some courtly dances that you can do. The word of power. Could you possibly teach this one to people? Could you possibly, oh yes, absolutely, and we will model it. I remember doing this with my son when he was 5. He was a non-verbal kid. When they start speaking, you don't start demanding please and thank yous, you just want them to talk. But at a certain point you realise that if they're just too demanding, they're going to come across as rude and people start being mean to them. So I told Rowan about the word of power. And then I said, I'll prove it to you. So I had Jenny there. I said, Jenny, stand on your head and do a fart. She said, no way. So it doesn't work. I said, but hey, Jenny, could you possibly stand on your head and do a fart, please? She said, absolutely. She stood on her head. Ha 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 ha. Okay. 1 week later, Rowan comes downstairs. He has time to process it. Daddy, could you possibly da-da-da? Absolutely. These social rules are very important. And the lovely thing about autism is that you can explain them so practically and directly without social baggage or a feeling of shame or anything. So this is just simply how our species works. The reptiles, they do it like this. The monkeys, they do it like this. The horses, they do it like this. And the sapiens, that's us, we do it like that. And that's what stops us killing each other. It's all about conflict resolution. It's always about getting the job done from point A to point B. If you explain it like that, suddenly the difficult navigation of the shark-infested waters of neurotypical humanity get less shark-infested. As long as we have the T word. What is it? Try. As long as we have that extended support. Most people on planet Earth do not leave the village, go to New York City, become an advertising executive, buy a penthouse, a yacht, and that's our idea of what success means. What true ecological and economic success means is quality of life. One of the interesting things, remember I talked about shamanism at the beginning of this, I haven't mentioned it since, because that's just my personal journey. That you don't have to go see a shaman to do, no, that's what we did, but that doesn't, you don't even have to ride a horse. But when you are in those indigenous settings, and I've been in many of them, Africa, Native America, Australia, Southern India, Mexico, what you notice is that the person who does fulfill that role of healer, shaman, usually exhibits neuropsychiatric symptoms, often to a point where they would be institutionalized in our society. Schizophrenia, adult autism, epilepsy, bipolar, all of these things. There, it's regarded as a job description, qualification. These are not whimsical people. We think in the West that we're so practical. We are not. We eat the wrong food, then we have to rely on medicine to keep ourselves alive. We break up our family networks all the time. We are quite dysfunctional. We make decisions based on emotion all the time. Most of our political decisions are based on emotion. We are not that rational, but we're technological, so we think we're very rational. I can tell you that if we went out there in that desert, right here, for 3 days without all these props, we'd all die. Unless we knew really well how to survive it. So these societies are much more practical than our own, and they're all about survival. They don't waste their time with stuff if it doesn't work. They've found technologies which include spiritual technologies as well as mental and physical technologies. Whatever you may or may not think about that, the point I'm trying to make here is that the tribe finds a way for everybody to take both an economic and a social, deep and integral participation, not a marginalized one, in what goes on. And whatever you think about their systems of traditional medicine, they get sick and they get better. And they don't have access to a lot of Western medicine. They use it if they can, but often it's not there. If it was all bullshit, they'd all be dead. You know, that's the bottom line, because they get sick like anybody else. So clearly there's something to be learned. But I think that the most important thing to learn is the system of tribal support in an environment that's sensorily beneficial for us. Because that's quality of life in a nutshell. That's going on vacation to the beach. As soon as somebody makes the $1 million, what do they want to do? They want to buy a ranch. Why? So they got land to walk around on and feel like a hunter-gatherer. What did the aristocracy do in the Middle Ages in Europe? They took being a hunter-gatherer, i.e. the hunting rights, for hunting for, said only we, our social class, can have that. You peasants have to just, be peasants upon pain of death. That was the feudal system. So the highest quality of life, whether it's a beach resort or a hunting forest or a ranch, is really just a return to what it means to be an authentic human being. We don't need to raise it and make $1 million to do that. We can do it in our backyards. We can do it in city parks. We can do it on any piece of open ground. Especially if we do it in tribe, with a community. So, we've got to laugh. We've got to find it delightful. That bottle of champagne on ice when you get the diagnosis, not the kick in the... Movement, following the child, which is giving them choices and empowerment, letting them teach you. Trying to reproduce oxytocin as much as you can in the physicality of how you do that kinetics. Remember, if you rock your hips in some way, sit them on a ball, not a chair. Happens automatically. Have rocking chairs. We don't have any chairs at the New Trust, so they're all rocking chairs. You can do this very simply. That allows the receiving, but much more importantly, the retaining of information to come in. And then, very quickly, as I wrap up, the gifts of autism. It is a skill set. If these cultures in these other parts of the world have figured out ways in which it's a job qualification, it's going to behove us to do the same. Because at one child in 88 over the age of 8 and one boy in 56 over the age of 8, yes, they're going to participate economically. And it's only going to get more and more. And the business world is already shifting. There are human resources departments in Silicon Valley right now out there looking for people with Asperger's diagnosis. It was not happening 5-10 years ago. We now know that being non-verbal and being in a diaper does not preclude you from writing computer software or poetry. So I think that these kids are what I call dream whisperers, because they make your dreams come true too, and this is what's in it for you. Because you're all Class A human beings, or you wouldn't even be in this room. You wouldn't even give a flying F about it. Why should you, if you don't have skin in the game? So those of you who are professionals and therapists, thank you for caring. Thank you for wanting to do that professionally. Most people don't. So, what's in it for you? Because the burnout factor is high, it's exhausting. Let me outline what happened over a couple of years. When I, actually told me I can go on for another 5 hours, that's cool. All right, let's get some beers. When I got the diagnosis, I was a writer, traveling journalist, human rights activist in Africa, rider. All of those things I gave up, was prepared to give up, sacrifice my dreams. What actually happened was, I ended up riding across Mongolia, writing a book, doing all sorts of journalism, continued being an activist in Africa, because of the more international platform I now had, it actually became easier. Tribe happened around the new trail centre, so suddenly one could travel and do other things again. I made a film. I always wanted to make a film, didn't know how. Well, the film we made in Mongolia, The Horse Boy, we started it just as a project ourselves to keep a camera on him, just in case there was change. And if there was change, that we could document it, because as an autism parent, I wouldn't appreciate someone saying, I went to this place you'll never go to, met these people you'll never meet, and you have to believe that this amazing thing happened. That's not very useful. And what if nothing happened? We should document that too, but at least the diagnosis didn't prevent us from having this amazing adventure as a family. In fact, it caused us to have this amazing adventure. That alone would have been enough. However, change did happen. And the footage ended up being good enough. We put it together on our computers. We cheekily submitted it to Sundance. We didn't think they'd necessarily take it. We were unknowns. We'd never done it before, total rookies. They took it. It got sold to TV around the world. It got sold to cinema. We were flabbergasted. Suddenly, because of that, I'm at Sundance, and there's a bloke there called Mark Wardesky, who was the executive producer of all the Lord of the Rings movies. He goes, oh, that's interesting. What other ideas have you got floating about? And I fessed up to some ideas I had from adolescence, which have never gone away. Very strong story ideas, completely a product of smoking too much weed, and heavy metal, and playing too many fantasy role-playing games, because I couldn't get laid as a teenager, and I didn't have any musical talent, so joining a band was out. I tried it. And so you do what despairing teenage boys do, is you dissolve into those three things. And what came out of it, though, was a couple of story ideas, which I fessed up to, because, oh, I was that kid too. He said, put that on paper. I did. He hired me to write the script. We then took another of those ideas and turned it into a reality show called The Quest, which will be airing on ABC this summer. Watch out for it. It's fun. Nothing to do with autism. What I'm saying is, it was the autism that opened the door, because I had been willing to sacrifice my dreams, or at the very least put my dreams into the service of the dreams of my child. I think they're dream whisperers, these kids. I think that's what they do for us. You're familiar with the idea of the dream catcher, but what do you do with a dream when you've caught it? You still have to tame it, gentle it, whisper it, if you like, so that you can ride it to its fruition. So, what I want you guys to do tonight is ask yourself this very important question. What are my dreams? Because you may have forgotten, if like me, you were born back when Mastodon still bellowed to Mastodon across the primeval swamp, years before the wheel, you may have forgotten your dreams, because the vicissitudes of life can break them, poop on them, and bury them. But they don't go away. In fact, that's a fertilization process. They put down roots. You may have forgotten those, so ask yourself tonight, and what will happen is about 36 hours after you ask the question, you'll be sitting on the loo, or in traffic or something, and it will go, bubble, 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 beep. Oh yeah, that was it. And almost immediately you'll have a pain reaction. You go, oh, I can't have it, and you thrust it away. This time, I bet you a pint. This time, and that's quite a few pints, the rules are different. This time, you will have it. This time, you must have it. Because that is what will put the gas in your tank to keep doing the work year after year and beyond your death. That's the contract you make with God. You put your dreams into the service of the dreams of those more vulnerable than yourselves, your own dreams come true. Dream whispers into people. That's all I've got. Thank you.